So I'm lining up the equipment I'm going to be using today. This is my respirator. It has removable filters, replaceable filters, and it has a neck strap and a head strap, and you can adjust that to fit you. And I'm going to demonstrate how to mix dye stock for you using best practices. And all of the tools that I'm using are used exclusively for dyeing. So my knife, my measuring spoon, my jar, my measuring cup, all of these items are used only for dyeing and should only ever be used for dyeing once you start using them for dyeing. And that is to make sure that you're not introducing any toxins into your food supply. So to mix this dye stock, in this case, I am using 1 teaspoon of dye powder and 1 cup of boiling water. There are other ways for you to mix dye stock, but I suggest that whichever way you start with, you continue doing the exact same way so that the colors that you produce maintain the consistency between batches. So you want to always do things the same way so that your yarn has some consistency in color. So I've just rinsed off my teaspoon and I'm mixing the dye powder and a tiny bit of water in my jar. I'm using an old jam jar, and now that I've mixed a little bit of water with the dye powder, I'm going to go ahead and mix in the rest of the boiling water, making sure that the dye powder is completely dissolved. And this is my dye stock. It is not based on weight, rather it is based entirely on volume. And if I do this consistently every time, then I will get pretty consistent results when I am dyeing wool. And there I'm just labeling the lid of my dye stock. That is lilac from Jacquard. And I'm going to repeat the process for you a second time so that you can see again how I make my dye stock. This time we're using periwinkle. Again, I'm using an old jam jar, and I am also going to be doing the 1 teaspoon to 1 cup of water. Whichever way you choose to make your dye stock, make sure you keep notes in your notebook about which method you've decided to go with, and keep doing that method all the time and you won't get confused. So again, put the lid on your dye powder just to make sure there are no additional airborne particles in the air. And I'm going to fill up my measuring cup with 1 cup of boiling water. If you have trouble dissolving some of your dye powders, you can always make a paste with your dye powder and water just by adding a tiny bit of liquid to the dye powder. And once it is made into a paste, then you can add the remainder of your water, and then it will create a nice dye stock solution. I just stir my dye stock with the same knife that I use for leveling. It just makes sense because then I don't have extra utensils to wash at the end of my dye session. But you can use a spoon, of course. That's completely dissolved, so I will go ahead and put the lid on and label the lid with the name of the color, which again is Periwinkle, also by Jacquard. Jacquard makes acid dyes. They make other kinds of dyes as well. Make sure you're using acid dyes for your wool. If you have any questions about dyeing wool or yarn, you can ask me over on patreon.com/Allison Barnes Yarn.